Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative take about the world around me. So this particular episode, I'm focusing in on Beetlejuice. So I'm going to talk about the original Beetlejuice and then give thoughts on the up-and-coming, sequel that's coming up this September. And I also would like to know what you all think about, the aspect and the themes that are interlaced in Beetlejuice and the breakdown about how it came to be in this episode too. So please feel free to reach out to me either through email, either through Substack, or Twitter. Or I'm working that out too on YouTube. All right, so let's dive in. Okay, so, Tim Burton style. Wow. The aesthetic in his style, particularly when you see it in movies like Edward Scissorhands, and then even in the Batman, and going on to Big Fish, going on to The Corpse Bride, and so forth. It has a way of bringing the macabre, but merging it with a fantastical kind of perspective that's something to take a deeper look at. And he also has another layer onto this of the aspect of bringing forth the uncomfortable, and to where you feel that sense of presence in each different films in a different way, to where it's questioning the sense of morality and the aspect of the human nature, particularly with the aspect of family and tradition. All right, so what am I saying about this? What is, all of these things focusing in on? So, excuse me. So, with Beetlejuice, okay, you know, it's set up with this young couple and the aspects of them in the afterlife of still trying to hold on to the aspect of what is good and what is moral, even though they are in the afterlife and they're seeing all these going in between the natural world and the spirit world, and seeing all these outrageous things in the midst of it. And all these elements come into play. So it's quite interesting when I'm going to towards the mid layer piece of this episode, get into the aspect of the facts that I discovered. It's quite interesting with the two script writers, creators, with rolling that into the director, Tim Burton. And then, that's a whole thing within itself, is writing the map to the director, or is the director the final call? It's a whole thing with it. But needless to say, that's one of those elements too, in the direction of how a film goes or how a television show goes, from my point of view. That's something to also consider too. So it's quite interesting with the notion of having the concept in mind of what would it be like, what would this element be like if these paranormals, if these spirits, phantasmas, so to speak, putting in that little layer of elements of, different culture, of Spanish, of phantasmas, is, quite the linguistic lineage of what is said in the Spanish-speaking world. And it's quite interesting with the element of the layers of how that, connects to the aspect of ghosts and paranormal too, because that's a ever-present thing, particularly in Mexican culture. And it unites into different aspects or aspects of the culture as you go into South America and then on to Europe with Spain and things of that nature too. So that that's why I mentioned that. So it's a very intriguing sort of come to terms to think about that the spirits of a house, what is the history behind this? And okay, so Casper, captured that element from a childlike point of view, but with Beetlejuice, it's more of a adult perspective, but you also have the underlying element of the adolescent perspective about death, and then also the childlike wonder of exploration with the fantastical elements of the visual perspectives that you see throughout the film to capture in, that essence of not having such a gore-like esque into presenting these things in this movie. And so it's quite interesting because the aspect of tradition and family also comes to play in this movie too. So when you see the Deeds, as far as Lydia Deeds and her mom and her stepfather and so forth, these people are not what you peg as a traditional sort of type of family. They're more modern, they even pose it as an heir of themselves, as a rite of passage, her parents, that, we come from New York. We have these heirs, and then we are of cultured breed, but we still are looking for the space, a place, and then with an essence of a space of home to dwell in and have a simple life, so to speak. And it's quite interesting, even in their hub of heirs, they still want to see that aspect of the importance of being part of a simple town from their point of view, just slowing down and not being part of the hustle and bustle of the aspect that typically happens when you live in the city. But it's also unique because they also manage to bring into play the aspect of wanting their own culture still relevant in the presence of this area of it looks like they might be in Vermont, but the aspect of that, but that feel of the hometown spirit, they want to bring in the elements of their urban jungle, concrete jungle, avant-garde sort of existential sort of, cultural presence there that know that they are still of this world, that world, And so I think it's also quite interesting, the other layer that is laid into the details, particularly with this, with the the interior designer that Catherine O'Hare brought in. And it's quite interesting because, as I found out through research, his character takes on a new look when I found out that one of the script writers, they particularly did a piece that wrote particularly with detective work that has to do with I guess it's a spoof or being element of that, with bringing in the aspect of crime and detective and in the aspect of homosexuality and all of that interlaced in these writings, that one of the particular writers did write pieces like that. And then when you see this character in there, you start to wonder, is that also a tie to the thinking process of how this character is developed? And so I'm particularly bringing this up because it's interesting, because it's one of those things that, it's a nod, wink, wink, about his sexuality, but it's not abrasive in your face. Oh, look, this is I am gay, hear me roar kind of perspective. It's more like he is a sophisticated element of layer of the type of people you will find living, particularly in New York, but you can kind of see his sexuality comes to play at that. And so that's a far cry of, unfortunately, of the things that we see in today's era, particularly with the abomination that happened. And that's just, words faze me with that, with the Olympics, and trying to say that we're not pushing an agenda for, gay, trans, whatever. But it's a time and place for all of those things. Watching the Olympics is about a place of looking at people who work hard and strive hard and want to be the best, and within that, the athleticism within winning, and then the defeat, and then being graceful in defeat, and having all of that team spirit come along with the Olympics. And then, the Olympics is traditionally a family affair to watch, and it's very unfortunate that that's falling on deaf ear now, and there's no decorum that is respected in the aspects of things like this. And so with the Gina Davis and unfortunately Alec Baldwin with his insanity and his everything that's going on in his life, personal life. But, you know, his particular character here, you know, looking at the bright side of his character in this movie, is very interesting because these two characters are the example of what it means to hold on to your sense of reality and your sense of decency in the midst of uncertainty. You know, it was quite easy. It would quite easy for them to just give in and just be aloof or just be discerning with the aspect of scaring off these inhabitants and their dwelling, you know, just completely be a typical aspect of an element that you would see in a horror film, of just completely scaring them off, to scaring them to the wit's end, and that's the end of it, or, you know, trying to be violent or so. But no, they took a different route, and that there's, as I said, grace within understanding the elements of being moral. And then all the other aspect of Beetlejuice himself with his degradation. All right, so with all this said, let's get into the factual parts of Beetlejuice. Okay, so all of this started with Bad Neighbors. It was the mid-1980s, and horror novelist Michael McDonald was trying to break into the movie business. In the wake of blockbusters like Poltergeist and Ghostbusters, he helped to write his own supernatural script. One day at their home in Medford, Massachusetts, the author and his partner, award-winning Tufts professor Lawrence Steinlick, were thinking of ideas. At the time, the families living nearby often annoyed them. Steinlick couldn't really recall what they exactly did to perturb them, but it served as inspiration. Spooky films usually features evil spirits preying on unsuspecting humans. Steinlick wanted to flip that premise. What would be the situation, he asked, if you had good ghosts? And it's the people who moved in the house who were awful. With that concept in mind, McDowell devised a professional bioexorcist to scare off the insufferable occupants. So the brainstorming commenced in sessions formed from the basic plot of the decades as it's deemed funniest scary movies. So, going on, says, my philosophy is if I have one, McDonald told Farragon in 1984. So these are what these is the type of writings and a sense of humor that is inspired for the aspect of the aesthetic of the film Beetlejuice, And it's saying that it's that the universal joke, and we are all the butt of it. So this is the ever present theme in the movie, which is, you see that particularly when the Alec Baldwin's character and Gina Davis, when they're just going about their lives, going over a bridge, and it just so happened that their demise is a dog that jumps off of the plank and they fall to their death. And it's very interesting because there's fan theories, if I'm not mistaken, that says that dog was actually planted there by Gina Davis's, the character of Gina Davis's, her relative that was asking her about the real estate and what are they going to do with that big house, because they didn't have kids at the time. And, just pressing the question because, she's a real estate agent. And so there's a fan theory that she is the plot to their death that was all planted. And that's quite interesting. All right, so let's go on to other elements about Beetlejuice. All right, so I think it's quite interesting. I'm just merely going off the trailer that I saw for the up and coming Beetlejuice, the sequel. Interesting with the aspect of see how that plays out with conjuring Beetlejuice back into Lydia's life. And also an interesting take that it's the perspective of a daughter getting her back and saving her, and the elements of showcasing that of how set fear per se or phantoms reoccur back, and in facing those demons and having to use playing with the elements of having to use the forces of evil to come back good. I think it'll be an interesting play on that. And also the spin of, it seems like they're going to take that spin of the single mother route instead of a traditional aspect of a parental role of a two-parent household. And I think all those elements are quite interesting. And it was also interesting that there was plans for a Beetlejuice sequel, and it was supposed to center around this aspect, from what I understand, of poltergeist, that of gods, of Hawaiian gods, and is haunting a hotel and all that, and that seems all over the place. And I was like, oh, okay. But, this up-and-coming film that's coming up in September, I think it is something to take a second look at. All right, so here we go. Let me go into more depths about the factual part of everything with Beetlejuice. So no other material was or ever would be better suited for than the 29-year-old at the time Tim Burton's playful, macabre aesthetic. So the director's second full-length feature tells the story of a deceased couple, Barbara and Adam Matlin, which is Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin, whose old Victorian home is invaded by tasteless yuppies, Delia and Charles Dietz, which is Catherine O'Hara and Jeffrey Jones, and their goth teenage daughter, Linda, Winona Ryder, and Michael Keaton, which plays the iconic title character, and spelled Beetlejuice to be exact. And it's quite interesting with Michael Keaton playing this role. And he's just, I think that was a really good choice with picking him, because he has and had that knack to really get in depth with the character, different characters, to where he's not stereotyped into certain roles, and he could really portray that in the best light of the weirdness and the obscurity of this particular character, Beetlejuice. And so it's with the perfect amount of grimy, charming sleaze. In The New Yorker, a critic, Pauline Kael, compared the actor's performance to an exploding head and wrote that he isn't on screen nearly enough. So Burton's Danny Elfman scored opus is stuffed full of campy, terrifying special effects, teen angst, nouveau, rich, blasting New England charm, a vision of death as an inescapably dysfunctional bureaucracy, and Harry Belafonte's songs. So I think it's quite interesting too with the aspect of critics. So yeah, particularly going back to Ebert and Roper, how is an overall theme to where you can take a look at that, of that having this interest, hired interest, and to purposely writing things off as bad, and how not really, giving things a good analysis, and just seeing stuff at a elementary, rudimentary substance surface level sort of idea, that that being pretentious for the sake of pretentious, and that linking into these critical reviews. And then it's quite interesting when it's one of the things you got to take things with a grain of salt and see it for yourself, and then just go from there. And then how all of that is rooted in the essence of films, of how this whole culture of cult classics and stuff comes to be. I think that's quite interesting. And then also a very interesting documentary out called Brats, and it's all about the Brat Pack. And so, needless to say, the 80s zeitgeist of teen flicks, and how this one critic deemed them as the Brat Pack without, as a stab at the way that they were portraying American youth at the time. And so, they took this as a personal attack, and it changed the path of these particular actors' careers, and how without giving too much away, it's just very interesting how the elements of owning what you're doing and then building on that craft can change your whole outlook about things. And it could have been a whole new path for these actors, but some understood that and some didn't, and it's just quite interesting the elements of critics, how they play in films and the careers of actors and actresses. Okay, so how this formed a box office hit that spawned a Saturday morning cartoon and action figures and a theme park attraction. In hindsight, the success of a picture so strangely memorable possessed dinner party guests lip singing Deo, Killer Sandworms, and Robert Goulet seems quite obvious that this would get a following. But initially, the script was seen as intriguing but ultimately impossible oddity. Everybody wanted to own it, Senlick said. Nobody wanted to make it. Luckily, what turned the studios off actually appealed to Burton. So he was a former animator, fresh off his debut from the film Pee-wee's Big Adventure. The things that interest me the most, he told Rolling Stone in 1988, are the things that potentially won't work. It took an extraordinary effort to make Beetlejuice work. Without the assistance of a pair of young development executives, a powerful media mogul, and a skilled rewrite person, the movie may have died before reaching the afterlife. So long before Beetlejuice, McDowell had become enamored with death. To him, it was something to explore, not fear or avoid. Laughing about it certainly wasn't off limits. All right, so as I had mentioned, so McDowell had a interest in death, and particularly saying that himself, life is most grotesque. So this leading into his interest with P.H. Lovecraft, and also credited to Chinese and Japanese occult films that shaped his sensibility about death. So it says, quoting him, not for anything specific, he said, but just for their way of treating the supernatural in a straightforward fashion, and a way that Americans never quite get. So, also to add on to this, it's interesting, because particularly in Asian culture, the afterlife is seen as a step and another path of life, per se. You're not really, it's not the final aspect of a person's life. Just, that's what I'm saying, put it in that perspective. So, all right, so in 1968, McDowell began attending Harvard. While at college, he met Senlick, who directed him in a production of Bartholomew Fair, and they went on to have a 30-year connection. After graduating with honors in English, McDowell pursued a PhD in Brandeis and began writing fiction. In 1978, he finished his thesis, American Attitudes Towards Death, from the periods of 1825 to 1865. His first published novel, The Amulet, was released a year later. The Alabama-set Southern Gothic horror story hinges on a piece of jewelry that might be caused of a rash of grisly deaths. So this kicked off a run of pulp titles that included Cold Moon over Babylon of 80, The Elementals of 81, and the 6-volume Blackwater of 83, among some other books. So he also went under the pseudonym and co-wrote a series of gay detective novels, as I was talking about earlier. So in these novels, he was a working writer. He was a working writer. So within these novels, it said that Silent Slick, the author and editor, more than 25 books he wrote himself. He didn't rest on his laurels. It's the same. So he pumping out all this stuff. So McDowell took pride in his ability to churn out entertaining copies that was best enjoyed in the moment. So it says, with him quoting, "I think it is a mistake to try to write for the ages," he said in Douglas E. Winter's Face of Fear, a collection of interviews with the top horror writers. Says, "I seriously doubt there will be anyone here in 100 years. So he may not have considered himself to be a towering literary figure, but he was a writer's writer, so to speak." So, none other than Stephen King, from whom McDowell later co-wrote the movie adaptation of Thinner, once called him the finest writer of paperback originals in America today. McDowell broke into Hollywood in the early 80s, first writing for pioneering horror George A. Romero's anthology TV series Tales from the Dark Side. So by the mid-80s, he'd begun living part-time in LA. There he connected with Pico's production founders Larry Wilson and Michael Bender, who opened some of McDowell's books. At the time, Wilson was coming off a stint at Paramount. While attempting to prove himself as an executive at a mass studio, he said in an interview he felt like he'd surrendered ownership of some of his best ideas. So the experienced story and analyst, though he was returning to screenwriting and would be more fulfilled than doing somebody else's projects. So soon after this, he started working on McDowell on what became Beetlejuice. So the original story was significantly more sinister, particularly in the lead role being Beetlejuice. So here we go with this. So Beetlejuice was more sinister, more macabre, Sinlick said. The character was supposed to be a homicidal demon, not a scheming horn dog exterminator. At first, the Matlins died a truly gruesome death, and the Deeds had not one but two daughters. So when McDowell and Wilson finished in the latter part of this, said in interviews, he dropped the script off with an executive he knew at Universal. So where he served as a director of development for filmmakers Walter Hill. So the unnamed higher up read the draft and a few days later called Wilson into his office. So he literally said, "What are you doing with your career?" So in response to this, Wilson, who ended up as a credit on Beetlejuice, and this is an interview that Wilson did with Den of Geek. So this is what he said. "This piece of weirdness, this is what you're going to go out in the world with. You're developing into a very good executive." So it says, "You got great taste in material. Why are you going to squander all of that for this piece of BS?" Putting it mildly. So what basically was he saying? It goes to show right. Fortunately for Wilson, he had a backup plan. So while teaching UCLA and extension courses, he'd gotten to know Marjorie Lewis, a young developing executive at Griffin Film Company. So Griffin Film Company, backed Beetlejuice. And here we go. She loved Wilson's classes, during which well-known scripts were scrutinized and discussed. Says, I read everything she told me, and I read faster than anybody. And early of '85, Wilson brought Lewis Beetlejuice and asked her to read it. Said, I was blown away. Goes on, the next day, she dropped the script on the desk of Griffin president Eric Einser. She remembered imploring him to buy it, even going as far as threatening to quit if he didn't. So Lewis said that Griffin Film Company purchased the rights to the script that week. Burton was then wrapping up production on Pee-wee's Big Adventure for Warner Brothers, Griffin Film Division's parent company. When the director read the script for Beetlejuice, he was smitten. He thought he could have written it himself, David Ellerstein wrote in Rolling Stone. It carried his trademark blend of the outlandish and the matter-of-fact sort of speaking. But jargon of how, from what I'm interpreting out how everybody, the mechanics of writing, how people speak in the script, the characters speak in the script, that is. But after Burton signing on to helm the project, the studio gradually picked apart the script, which was at one point the working title was House Ghost. Burton also jokingly suggested Scared Sheetless, and was horrified when the studio actually mulled it over. In those days, Mike Simpson at William Morris represented both Burton and Warren alike. On the agent's recommendation, there are Schikeren, a screenwriter who just finished refiguring out the Top Gun script, was hired to polish up Beetlejuice. So according to the rewrite man, Alison Macker's biography of Shaken, he and Burton hit it off while spending time in the writer's hometown of Austin. Quite interesting. So by the late 80s, Keaton wasn't exactly in demand. So after starring in his hits like Night Shift in '82 and Mr. Mom in '83, he appeared in the underwhelming Touch and Go of '86, and then in Squeeze of '87. Still, the man who later became Batman turned Griffin down before finally giving in and taking the role. So it says this, is quoted, "You couldn't back him into a corner," Lewis said of the media mogul. "He's the smartest man in the world." So in early '87, Beetlejuice was shot both on a soundstage in Los Angeles and East Corinth, Vermont. So that's where the location was for the small town. So the quaint New England town provided the ideal backdrop for the clueless access of the Dietz, who turned an old house into a tacky art installation. Okay, I'm going to wrap up everything, and here are some more facts about Beetlejuice. So the famous Belafonte-infused lip-singing scene, which led to Deo being played on the top 40 radio stations, only happened because the singer's music was easy to license. Songs such as the R&B classic When a Man Loves a Woman was a pre-Michael Bolton era, were suggested, but it was too expensive to clear. So every time somebody heard the words David Griffin, who was said, they raised the price. Steinlich enjoyed visiting the production. At one point, he met old Hollywood star Sylvia Sidney, who plays Juno, the Matildan cigarette-puffing caseworker, afterlife caseworker. When she noticed that her customary hotel gift basket contained a giant uncut spunky fruit, Silent recalled her openly wondering, what am I supposed to do with this pineapple? That's quite funny. So Silent saw McDowell's fingerprints all over the movie's final cut, right down to the brothel aspect with Beetlejuice visits. So, as quoted, it says, it is actually based on a series of 19th century French stereograph cards of devils going to various aspects in hell. So, to add on to this, it just said Silent, whose partner amazed a large collection of death-related artifacts that are now on display at Northwestern. So it's also quoted, we not only own this set, we also had a book about it, and lent Tim the book. And this was in March 30th of 1988. All right, so here are the breakdowns of the numbers as far as the box office impact of this movie. So Beetlejuice hit theaters. When it hit theaters, it took in $8 million in the opening weekend and eventually grossed $73.7 million in North America. The film, which had $13 million budget, was a big hit. The movie resonated so much with kids that it was spun off in the animated series and a long-running stage show at Universal Studios theme park. Yeah, and I remember that cartoon show. It was quite interesting, and it took on a different plot of Lydia being more associated with Beetlejuice. So, following the release of Beetlejuice, Warner Brothers greenlighted Burton's version of Batman. And Sam Hamm in the same arrangement had led with McDowell on Beetlejuice. Alright, so let's get into Beetlejuice 2, the sequel. So, hold on, sweetheart. Okay, I'll get it for you just a minute, baby. So, the sequel, which according to Rewrite Man, was titled Beetlejuice in Love. So, it's centered on a romantic triangle involving the title character of an opera singer and her dead fiance. Saccharine fell ill in the summer of 1990, and the script was later shelved. So, this is the working aspects of the sequel and the earlier versions into what the version came to be to what will be seen in theaters in September. So Burton soon came up with the idea, as I mentioned earlier, hold on baby, for Beetlejuice Goes to Hawaii. Jonathan Jim even wrote a script, but it never panned out. Since then, rumors were swirling about the ghost with the most, and again being summoned to the realm of the living. And it's just quite interesting how this will turn out in theaters. So what do all of you guys think about Beetlejuice? What are your thought process about how the impact of the film in society? I would like to hear from you all either through X, either through email or Substack. All right. And also, what do you guys thought process about film critics and film theory and all of the aspect? I would like to know about that too. All right. So this reaches the end of the Hovering Light. Tune in, turn up, and absolutely take care. Bye-bye now.